So I'm finished with my drawing stage. It's not perfect. We're going to edge a little bit closer to something more accurate, but let's start with blocking in. First thing I need to do is to clean my palette. And you can use them for wiping off the brushes as well. Okay, so the drawing's all done. The next stage is to start blocking in. So the first thing for blocking in, we'll be looking at the darkest tones first. So I just spent a few seconds looking at the image and asking myself, where are my darkest darks? Or where are the blackest tones across the picture? So we've got a wonderful range to work with here, from the shadows hidden in the hair, to the strong shadow under the chin, on the neck, the lips, under the nose, the eyes, the eyebrows, and so on. So there's lots of really strong shadows to work with. So I'm going to pick up I think I'll work with my number 6 brush. Yeah, that feels a good size brush. If a brush feels like it can do the job in one go, that's the brush I tend to go with. And I'm going to use a little bit of linseed oil now, so a tiny bit of medium, not too much. When I work with my darks, I try and work just a little bit with the medium and get a really nice sort of glaze, as you can see there. And it gives a sort of translucency to it and thinness. I don't want it to be too thick and opaque. I will get thicker and more opaque as I get lighter with my colours and tones. So we're going to start off sort of working with this sort of mix to begin with. Any medium would work perfectly well for this. So let's start painting this up. Or I'm still in many ways going to be drawing it as well. I think all painting is drawing, so but I'm going to try and do this with kind of really strong marks, strong confident mark making. And I'm going to try as far as I can to say it with 1 or 2 confident, bold brush strokes, much in the way that Zorn really showed us that you can say so much with very little. And the confident mark making as well was, pioneered not just by Zorn, but other artists like Sargent, Onsinger Sargent, Soroya, De Laszlo, among many others who all looked at that. And if we look even further back, you've got Frans Hals, the Dutch artist, and Velázquez, the Spanish artist, who really championed the bravura, confident mark making, the painterly painting. And I suppose that's sort of what I'm going to try and do, particularly with this mark making. It's already just with that strong introduction of my darkest black, my darkest tone, how the painting just really has so much strength already, and that's because of the range of tonal values. But I've adopted this dark one. What I'm doing with my eyes, by the way, I'm starting to sort of squint, half close them, just so I can see the picture kind of more clearly. I'm seeing the tonal values clearer. Sometimes when my eyes are wide open, it's sort of hard to see where my darkest tones are. Squinting is very good just for getting rid of the unnecessary detail at this early stage and seeing what really matters and what's the most important elements of the portrait. And squinting just helps you see those tonal values so much clearer and where they are. So I'm still drawing, and what I'm doing, I'm sort of following this sort of underpainting, this underdrawing. I'm sort of taking it as a hint that my brushes need to go there, but I'm still asking myself, well, is it right? I'm still questioning and doubting what I've put on. I'm not just assuming the underpainting is perfect. So I'm assuming, as I often do, that it's probably wrong, and just look and ask, does it need to move up or down or left and right? So I'm still thinking about it critically. I'm not just filling it in. I'm still very much drawing with the brush, putting it in the right place in an objective fashion. So I'm still taking this brush up and measuring, so the darkness of the nostril. I'm not that good to sort of get it right first time, but the secret is no artist of the past or present is that good that they can just go boom, 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 and it's perfect. There's a lot more check-in and measuring and awareness that goes into effortless looking works. Effortless really describes sort of the way the painting looks, not really how it's produced. It's not just sort of slapped on all over the place and suddenly something happens. There's a lot more planning or knowledge and awareness of both the subject matter and the medium for those paintings that just look like they've just happened. Let's look at, there's a really strong dark shadow there, which I think is delicious. Let's put in the tone here. This is going to go up a little higher there, and the strong mark, it's sort of not quite horizontal, and now that will just sort of disappear into there, and it'll go a little lighter, melting into that dark already. And then the same goes for this brush stroke here under the lips, and then we get down to the neck. And again, I want to keep the darks quite thin. I don't want to lay them on thick. And that's dark down there. I'm not going to do too much in the way for the hair at the moment. I'm just going to focus very much just in this area and grow out. Let's just give a slight hint of darkness up there. So I want to make sure I get that sweep coming in of that light, which will probably sit in there somewhere. So I'm just using my finger just to help sculpt and guide that, and the cheekbone will come across. So those are my sort of darkest, blackest tones. There's a sort of subtle bit down here, I suppose, would be worth putting in. And again, that's going to help that back to the design of sweeping up through the picture. I suppose because this is not so much a conventional portrait in that it's not sort of really focused on the character or the personality of the subject. It's sort of more kind of ambiguous, really. It's more of a study, I suppose, of the face and facial features of our model. So I can sort of, have a little bit more fun and awareness of the mark making. I mean, you can do that, of course, with a conventional sort of portrait, but something like this where it's more of a study, it's much more, I think, about the kind of the fun of the mark making and the design as much as it is about capturing that person. So that's the beginning of the darkest tonal values using the black, but I'm going to go up that scale now and start bringing a little bit of red. So I'm going to take the cadmium red with no medium into this dark mixture. So I want to get it, the red is lightening up the black, and it gives us a real like deep rusty sort of red wine plum sort of colour, which I can see in quite a few aspects. So I can see these are what we call probably transitional tones. They're not pure black dark shadow, they're sort of that next stage up, a good one. So they often kind of run very close and alongside the darkest tones. So, for example, in this area under there. And I'm allowing the brushstrokes to sort of merge in and marry in with the black brushstrokes already applied. I want them to kind of come together and working with each other. I've got a very strong one sort of happening here. And again, trying to say it with real strong finesse. If you can say it with one brush stroke, much better to do it than with 20 uncertain fussed and fiddle brush strokes. It'll look so much more confident, and it'll look like you know what you're doing. So I'm following the edges, not of all the dark brush strokes, but some of them, working from this dark to light formula. This way of painting's been around for centuries, dark to light. So it's very traditional, really, but can be used and accommodated for a more contemporary approach. A hint more red, and of course, as I'm adding more red, I'm getting further away from the black. So I kind of got a redder version here, slightly darker and darker again. So use your palette wisely. It'll stop you getting mixed up and muddy, and have a good sized palette as well. working with a small palette sort of stops you from really utilising the range of colours that are available. And even with such a limited palette as the Zorn palette, you still need a good space to utilise the full potential. So if you're working on one of those little plates or a tiny little tear-off palette, maybe get 2 or 3 plates off, or a couple of extra palettes, or just a big piece of wood or bit of canvas that you can use to mix your colours on. Let's look at this area up here. I love the way this just melts away up into the eye socket up there. Getting slightly warmer. The paint is not that thick, as you can see. It's not massively fat, as we say in the oil. It's not that fat and thick, but it's just a little bit more than what we started with in regards to that dark. So that fat on lean, we call that in oil painting terms. We start off lean, very, very thin, and every time we get a little bit lighter, as I am a little bit lighter now, we get just a tiny bit thicker and thicker. So the thickest part will be when we put on our highlights, which will be at the very end. And I would do the same if this was acrylic as well. You could do this exact process with the acrylic paint. The only difference is, of course, is that the acrylic dries, whereas the oil stays wet, so you can kind of move and blend that a little bit more. But apart from that, the process works exactly the same. Again, so getting redder, which is also then tonally getting lighter and also warmer as well. So we've got a mixture of both tonal values getting lighter, but my temperature also is getting warmer. So things like cheeks and lips, noses and so on, this is where we'll start to see this start to happen. So there's a hint of the outer lips going to start appearing there and there. The lips will get slightly pinky more purple, but for the moment it's quite nice just to suggest tonally where they lie. And again, allow the brush strokes just to overlap each other by a few millimetres or so. They all sit quite happily on top of each other. Bring a hint of white, the tiniest bit of white and ochre now. Still keeping it warm. A little bit more red. There we go. That's better. So we're getting into our deeper warm oranges now. And I'm working, as you've noticed, around the whole picture. On the whole face. I'm not just painting the eye or the nose or the neck. I'm working tonally across the whole canvas. Doesn't matter what feature it is, just work from dark to light. It just keeps me on the straight and narrow. And if ever I need to drop that down, as I am now, just need to quickly go back and just put something back in that I should have put in a bit darker. That's not a problem. Just go back in and paint it in darker where it needs to be. Which is just around the nose down here. Push that in there, it's a bit darker. My eyes constantly going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, check, 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 check. Sort of getting used to that rhythm of assessing how it looks. It's just a good habit. It will help you look at the picture objectively and how it's developing with your eye just going back and forth, left, right. Almost as if you're watching a tennis match. And you can see any flaws or problems will stand out a lot easier if you do so. Okay, so I'm going to now jump up to my real kind of mid-tones. I'm going to keep this brush as my sort of darker tone and pick up the same size brush, which is another number 6, and this will be my kind of more mid-tone based brush. So I want to get this really rich orangey colour I can see, which I'm going to keep sort of here in between the red and the ochre. Let's get a bit more red on the palette. Let's see how that is, if that's too strong, a tad too strong. So just a hint of white, not too much. Nice, that's good. So I'm quite pleased with that. So I can start blocking that in. Still drawing and following these little shapes and planes. I'm allowing my brush to follow almost the sort of the formation of the muscles. So if it's sort of going from top to bottom, then paint it from top to bottom. If the muscle looks like it's going from left to right, then paint it that way. It'll represent those facial features a lot more authentically if you follow the shape of the face and the shape of the muscles. You don't need to have anatomical knowledge of the figure to do that. It just sort of makes sense. You follow the direction, the face will kind of guide where your brush strokes are going to go. Sort of bridging the gap there on the palette. And again, just slightly overlapping brush strokes. They're all merging and working together. Now they're not getting muddy, and the reason I'm not sort of getting challenging muddy colours is what I'm not doing is this. I'll demonstrate. What I'm not doing is this. I'm not doing that. You see that, which is just rub. And of course, what I'm doing, if I keep doing that, I'm mixing all those colours up together on the surface of the canvas, and that's a big no-no. You don't want to do that. You'll end up getting everything looking exactly the same. We often call that rubbing or licking the canvas with the brush, and you feel like you're in control, but quite often it comes out of nervousness and not quite sure what's going on. So I don't know if you notice, but a common trait to the way that I'm painting is I'll sort of put in that, and I'm trying to leave it. I'm trying to avoid licking the canvas. When we get in towards the sort of the detail stage later, I will do a little bit more controlled elements of blending, but it's more softening edges as opposed to sort of real blending. And I'll allow myself to do that a little bit more. But in this blocking in stage, it's not really about getting anything that's accurate in detail, but it's identifying the correct tone and mixing the correct colour. That's really what this stage is all about. So let's now get a little lighter and bring in our ochre into this mixture here. And I can push that cheekbone up a little bit. I've also got a little thicker as well. Whoop, a little paler, isn't it? It's like, I love how that white of that canvas underneath is kind of giving that illusion of the highlight. I mean, now we're starting to get some interesting sort of purple colours because the way the skin is reflecting light. So I'm going to start putting those in. So I just sort of get these sort of subtle mid-ochres in. And just check there's something down there, a little warmer. There you go. And again under the shadow sort of there as well. So I'm wiping my brush clean on rags or tissue paper as opposed to constantly dipping them in the terps or the paint thinner. If you do that, no matter how much you dry them at a clean brush, you'll bring the brush back onto your palette and the moisture in the brush will kind of get into your palette and make it all thin. And that'll cause more complications with getting the palette muddy, and that'll kill that process of working thin to thick, or from lean to fat. So be careful, you don't have to keep cleaning your brushes if you're working with oil. Of course, if you're working with acrylic, you do need to clean them so they don't dry out. So I want to start looking at this introduction of cool colours, because these purple quality of light is very, very subtle, but there's a lovely kind of balance of the cool colours, and they're happening very close to the highlights, the kind of lighter parts. So I want to get the suggestion of those in, and I'm going to again do this with another brush. I'll work with a number 4, and I need to make this sort of purple. Now, of course, I haven't got my blue, so I have to be a little more creative. So let's bring some white, the red, and a hint of black. By mixing these will give me this sort of plummy colour. I think that's sort of as purple as you can really make it. Remember, because the black acts as a sort of a blue, so by combining the black and the red, you give that sort of cooler illusion of a purple. So let's see how that would look on there. So that's a bit dirty, it's a little dark in tone, so let's make it a little lighter. Hint more red. That's better, much better. So I'll just jump from here to about here, sort of a purpley pink sort of colour, if I was to have to describe it. And already just those couple of marks, it gives a real welcomed balance of temperature. It's been very warm, very hot up until now with the reds and oranges and warm browns, and suddenly putting this whitey chalk colour, this sort of pale pinky purple, it's a sudden calming balance, which is sort of what the painting was starting to need. Now, you'll never be able to mix colours that you may see with the Zorn palette. So if you see a bright blue or a bright greeny turquoise, of course you can't mix that with this limited palette. So you sort of have to substitute it instead. So I can't quite make some of these reflective colours accurately because I'm unable to, because those colours are not available, but I can get equivalents, like there, for example. And you might think, well, then why don't we just sort of squeeze out the colour blue? But by doing that, I think that will take away the kind of the unity that a limited palette gives you. And I want the picture to be, united and really harmonious. And that limited colour range gives you that automatically because the colours are working together. So if you're going to try this at home, don't be tempted to, oh, go and add yourself a green or a blue, because it kind of kills the whole illusion and point of why this limited palette is so effective, and it really helps you look at your colour mixing and to really, I suppose, ascertain what can work well and what it can be left out if it really isn't that important or that needed. What can you substitute something for, like I'm doing now? Check. So I've got a really interesting range of colours here on the forehead. So we've got, if we just look at it, you've got this shape on the right hand side, sort of like almost like the fin of a dolphin or a shark, sort of trying to give it a descriptive name. So I want to make sure I get that in first, make sure I've painted that shape right, sort of here. And then the lightness there, which could do with being a fraction lighter perhaps. And then I've got these other bits. So there's a real white patch here and a pale white patch there. And then I've got this sort of mass in the middle. It's slightly blue, pinky purple here. And then you've got that lighter bit there. So there's a really interesting range of shapes. So let's look at that. And then I think that'll give me the highlights needed for the rest of the portrait. So let's block those in. I'm just going to take one of these brushes and just wipe off the worst of that pigment. Let's take now the white, and because now I'm working with white, I'm going to go you know, really put it on, work with it nice and thick. Don't be afraid. So let's just block that on. How does that look? Not too bad, but let's go paler, hint more red. Okay, that feels tonally better. Whoops, don't want to go that dark there. And a lighter patch is going to go in that bit. There, and just take my other brush and just merge those edges together. And then using that same colour, I can start to put on the highlights that are elsewhere. So we've got the pale light hitting the eye, top of the eyebrow, the eyelid, sorry, sort of there and there. Oops, slip that across a bit too excitedly there. Let's just give that warmth back in the middle. There. And then taking a trace of it here, I need to give a few more indications of midtones there. Let's just fill that in for the moment. And then looking at this area, which needs to be lighter actually, where I sort of my first mark there was a bit too dark tonally. So this is, you know, really important. I'm balancing it constantly and I'm comparing this to that and that to this. It's just how important the this blocking in stage. This is for me, this is the best bit of painting. This is the fun bit, the figuring things out. This is the bit I enjoy the most. It's like a giant puzzle, giant problem that needs to be solved. And you feel like a proper artist when you're painting like this as well. And then let's look at that. So I'm going to bridge the gap now between these two here. There, so it's sort of a combination of the warm and the cool. And then this is the sort of colour that will end up appearing here in these sort of mid-tones. Possibly a hint warmer. Let's go look at just a bit of warmth there. Take the light all the way up to the edge of the nostril there. Good, strong contrast between those two features there. There, again, looking at that bit there. So I've got three brushes on the go. I've got sort of a light, a dark, and this sort of one in my hand right now, which is this sort of mid-tone colour. Obviously, it's a real variety of mid-tones. There's not just one mid-tone. There's a real symphony of them there. And again, that's just pushing the edge of that jaw back a fraction. And then just go back to my highlight brush. Again, thicker with the white. Really putting on, and then this bit here is going to be paler still. Now I'm not working with pure white. If you put pure white out the tube onto a portrait, even if that's how it seems in the photograph, it'll often make the picture look flat. Lastly, I've just got to look at that lips, which of course are nice and pink. So I'm going to take a different brush for that. It's this another number 4, and it's going to be quite a warm pink. Now, in reality, if I was mixing that, there'd probably be a bit more crimson in that. But of course, I haven't got that, so they're just going to have to be just that little richer red. And that's going to be quite a nice welcomed colour to the whole picture, that hot red, reddy pink. Maybe I can go a bit deeper. Yeah. If I take some of that red and just a hint of the darkness just over here, just a little bit, just to sort of put on the bottom part of the lip there, and that'll offers a nice transition into the shadows. And then take my light brush, my sort of highlighty brush, and just splash that over the top lip, like that. I need to sort of give some sort of suggestion to the hair, the braids of the hair. Now I don't want to really overly suggest those. I'm bringing a little bit of the linseed oil, the medium, just to sort of keep this fluid and sort of sketched and suggested. I'm not going to paint individual braid by braid, but just that warmth I think is needed, that red, that's going to balance nicely with the lips. And it's quite a important design factor of the portrait, the quality of the hair. Just sort of blob it in there. And again, I'm going to do the same with the dark mark. Again, with linseed oil, using black. And I'm not quite sure how much I'm going to do with the hair. We'll have to sort of see how it develops, but for the moment, I'm going to leave it suggested like that for the moment. And the last thing is to think about the sort of the neck of the scarf and the clothing. So I've got two options here. I can either just leave it as that sketch, and I think that would work in many ways, or I could put a colour into it. Now I don't know, is the honest answer, what's going to work, whether it will be better to put a colour in, or whether it's better to leave it as it is. I'm sure you all know what the answer is, but I'm not quite sure. So whenever I get to that point where I'm just not quite sure, just try and put a little suggestive colour. So of course I want this to sort of, I'll try and make a kind of a bit of a greeny sort of colour, which I do by using the ochre and a bit of black, and it will make a sort of a dirty olivey sort of colour. Sort of there, again, I'm going to use the linseed there just to keep it relatively thin. And just sort of put a mark on and just see how that looks. And if you like it, great, and if you don't, you can sort of rub it out. And what I think in this case this will help with is just that balance, because this sort of green will read as something that's quite cool. And I think that's a nice sort of addition. Just put a bit sort of up there. So that's my block-in done. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I've ascertained that the tonal values, the lightness and darkness of the planes of the face, and also guessing and gauging mostly the right colour of each of those tonal values. The next stage then is to sort of look at kind of crisping it up and really kind of getting those features sorted and hopefully really achieving a strong likeness.